Final Destination, released in 2000, brought together a cast of young, emerging talent, many of whom would go on to leave their mark on the horror and thriller genres. The film's strength lies not only in its inventive premise, but in the performances of its lead actors, whose portrayals brought depth and realism to what could have easily been dismissed as another teen slasher flick. This page explores the main cast members, their careers leading up to Final Destination, what they brought to their respective roles, and how the film influenced their trajectories in Hollywood and beyond. Devon Sawa plays the lead role of Alex Browning, the high school student who foresees a deadly plane crash and sets the entire plot into motion. Prior to Final Destination, Sawa had already begun building a reputation as a teen heartthrob and a capable young actor. He gained prominence with roles in Little Giants, 1994, Casper, 1995, and Now and Then, 1995. These earlier performances leaned more toward lighthearted or sentimental tones, showcasing his boy-next-door charisma and emotional vulnerability. However, his role in Idle Hands, 1999, a horror comedy, demonstrated that Sawa could carry darker material, paving the way for his casting in Final Destination. In Final Destination, Sawa delivered a performance filled with frantic energy, paranoia, and desperation, making his character's psychological torment feel palpable. His portrayal resonated with audiences and critics, earning him a Saturn Award for Best Performance by a younger actor. The film solidified his place in horror cinema and opened doors for more complex roles, though he later transitioned to more independent and niche projects. Ollie Larter, who played Clear Rivers, became one of the most iconic figures in the franchise. Before Final Destination, Larter was best known for her work as a model and her appearance in Esquire magazine's famous fictional character, Hoax, where she was presented as a made-up starlet. Her television roles, including an appearance in Dawson's Creek, gave her early exposure, but it was Final Destination that marked her cinematic breakthrough. Her performance as Clear was notable for its emotional restraint and strength. She wasn't just a damsel in distress. She was intelligent, composed, and resourceful, providing a solid counterbalance to Sawa's increasingly unhinged character. After Final Destination, Larter's career accelerated, and she reprised her role in Final Destination 2, 2003. Her success in the horror genre also led to her casting in the Resident Evil film series as Claire Redfield, further cementing her status as a genre icon. Kerr Smith portrayed Carter Horton, the aggressive and volatile high school jock who resents Alex for disrupting fate. Smith had already made a name for himself through his role as Jack McPhee in the groundbreaking television series Dawson's Creek. In that role, he portrayed one of the first openly gay teenage characters on American network television, earning praise for his nuanced and sensitive performance. Transitioning to the antagonistic role of Carter in Final Destination showcased Smith's range as an actor. He embodied the fear, denial, and toxic masculinity that often fuel human resistance to the unknown. Although his career remained rooted mostly in television, with appearances in Supernatural, Life Unexpected, and Riverdale, his performance in Final Destination is still remembered as one of the film's most compelling. Seann William Scott played Billy Hitchcock, the affable and somewhat goofy friend of Alex. Known best for his role as Steve Stifler in American Pie, 1999, Scott brought comic relief to an otherwise tense and dread-filled narrative. His performance was lighter and more endearing, making his eventual fate all the more tragic and effective. Scott's presence added levity without undermining the film's tone, and his character's death remains one of the most memorable in the franchise. While Final Destination wasn't a defining film in Scott's career, it demonstrated his ability to play roles outside his usual raunchy comedy niche. Afterward, he continued to find success in comedy and action films, including Dude, Where's My Car?, The Rundown, and the Goon series, but Final Destination remains a unique entry in his filmography. Tony Todd, though not one of the high school students, played a small but chilling role as William Blodworth, the mysterious mortician who provides cryptic insight into the nature of death. Todd was already a respected figure in horror thanks to his iconic role as the titular character in Candyman, 1992. His deep, resonant voice and commanding presence added a layer of eerie gravitas to Final Destination. Although his screen time was limited, his performance was so impactful that he became a recurring figure in the franchise. Todd's career continued to flourish in horror and science fiction, with appearances in films like The Rock, The Crow, and voice roles in animation and video games. His participation in Final Destination reinforced his status as a genre legend and introduced him to a new generation of horror fans. Amanda Detmer played Terry Chaney, Carter's girlfriend, who meets a sudden and shocking end early in the film. Although her role was relatively brief, Detmer made an impression with her grounded and empathetic portrayal. Prior to Final Destination, she had appeared in films like Drop Dead Gorgeous and had supporting roles in television. The abruptness of her death scene was instrumental in setting the tone for the film's unpredictability and cruelty. Detmer continued to work steadily in television and film, often taking roles in romantic comedies or dramatic series, though she never again reached the pop culture visibility that Final Destination briefly afforded her. Chad Donella took on the role of Todd Wagner, Alex's best friend. Donella, a Canadian actor, had appeared in television shows like The X-Files and Goosebumps, but Final Destination brought his talent to a wider audience. His character's death scene, involving a bathtub and an eerily timed chain of events, became one of the franchise's defining moments. Donella's nervous energy and vulnerability made Todd one of the more relatable and tragic characters. Following the film, he continued working in television and supporting film roles, including an appearance in Saw 3D and other genre entries. The ensemble cast of Final Destination represented a diverse blend of rising stars and seasoned performers. Their contributions went beyond delivering performances. They helped elevate the material and gave the story emotional weight. Each actor brought a different texture to the film, from Devon Sawa's raw paranoia to Ollie Larder's stoic resilience, from Seann William Scott's levity to Tony Todd's ominous wisdom. The chemistry among the cast made the concept of death as a relentless force all the more haunting. The film's success helped launch or reinvigorate several of these careers. Sawa and Larder, in particular, became fixtures in the horror and thriller spaces, while Todd was further enshrined as a horror icon. Final Destination showed that horror films, especially those with fantastical premises, could still resonate deeply with audiences when anchored by committed and capable actors. Over 2 decades later, the performances of this cast remain a crucial component of why Final Destination has endured as a cult favorite and genre-defining film. When Final Destination was released in 2000, it entered a cinematic landscape that had been dominated by self-referential horror thanks to the success of the Scream franchise. While Scream and its successors played with genre conventions, Final Destination carved out a unique niche by reimagining what horror could be. Rather than relying on a masked killer or traditional monsters, the film introduced the concept of death itself as the antagonist, an invisible, inescapable force with no motive other than to correct fate. This premise struck a deep chord in popular culture, leading to a ripple effect that extended well beyond horror cinema and into broader societal anxieties, media references, and even internet culture. One of the most significant contributions Final Destination made was its reinvention of how audiences perceive the inevitability of death in storytelling. The idea that death is not just a moment, but an orchestrated event, meticulously planned, unforgiving, and irreversible, offered a fresh psychological horror rooted in paranoia rather than violence alone. The chain reaction deaths, often caused by ordinary objects and environments, redefined what audiences feared. Simple activities such as boarding a plane, taking a shower, driving behind a log truck, or entering a tanning salon were forever altered in the collective imagination. The film turned the mundane into potential death traps, igniting widespread caution and a hyper-awareness of everyday surroundings. This hyper-awareness became so influential that Final Destination style became shorthand for any accidental, elaborate death. People began using the phrase colloquially to describe narrowly avoided mishaps or to predict freak accidents. For example, if someone noticed an unstable object on a high shelf or a precariously positioned ladder, they might jokingly reference Final Destination as a warning. This reflects how deeply the film infiltrated everyday conversation and thought patterns, blending cinematic fear with real-world experiences. Memes and internet culture have played a major role in keeping the film's influence alive. On platforms like Reddit, Tumblr, and Twitter, users frequently share videos of close calls or improbable accidents with captions like, "Death was coming for them," or "Final Destination vibes." TikTok has also embraced this trend, with users creating short videos dramatizing how common items or actions could result in elaborate fatal scenarios, often with the film's music or style as homage. This form of digital storytelling and humor underscores how Final Destination became a reference point for a generation conditioned by media to look for hidden danger. From a historical standpoint, the film tapped into the millennial psyche at the turn of the millennium, a time characterized by both excitement and existential dread. Y2K fears, growing anxieties about global instability, and the rapid evolution of technology created a cultural moment ripe for a film like Final Destination. The idea that no amount of preparation could prevent fate mirrored societal concerns about control, randomness, and vulnerability. The post-9/11 atmosphere that followed only intensified the relevance of the film's core message, that death can come suddenly, without reason, and in the least expected ways. Although the film was released before the attacks, its portrayal of an exploding aircraft and the psychological trauma that follows gained a grim layer of resonance after September 11, 2001. This may have contributed to the film's longevity and its continued relevance as both a horror story and a metaphor. Final Destination's success also reflected shifting trends in how horror stories were told. Instead of focusing on who the killer was, the film asked whether fate could be outwitted. This thematic inversion influenced a wave of movies that explored more metaphysical or existential horror. Films like The Butterfly Effect, the Cube series, and time travel thrillers began to explore similar territory. What if destiny was fixed, and what price did one pay for attempting to change it? This movement away from slasher tropes helped diversify the genre and open space for more conceptually ambitious narratives. In addition to film, Final Destination influenced television and even real-world conversations around death and fate. Shows like Supernatural, Fringe, and The X-Files echoed its motifs, where characters struggle with premonitions, prophetic visions, and the moral weight of survival. The idea of cheating death became not only a plot device, but a philosophical dilemma. Should one fight fate or accept it? Is survival a gift or a curse? These questions gave the film a thematic gravity that elevated it above pure spectacle. The film also reflected a growing Western interest in Eastern concepts of karma and predestination. Though not explicitly spiritual, Final Destination toyed with the idea that every action has a consequence, and that escaping immediate harm doesn't mean escaping destiny. This resonated particularly with younger audiences who were beginning to question rigid systems of control, government, religion, and societal structure, and found in Final Destination a metaphor for life's uncontrollable chaos. Another important aspect of its cultural impact is how it transformed the horror death scene. Previous horror films often featured quick kills or stylized violence, but Final Destination approached death as a process, an elaborate, nearly Rube Goldberg-like sequence of small mistakes and fatal timing. This creative method of staging deaths inspired filmmakers to prioritize choreography and suspense over gore. It also led to audience anticipation, where viewers would scan each frame for clues, trying to guess what object or situation would trigger the character's end. This death puzzle format became a hallmark of the franchise and was adopted by other films seeking to recreate that visceral tension. Beyond narrative and aesthetic influence, Final Destination also became a point of reference in discussions about mortality, particularly among teens and young adults. Unlike films that frame death as punishment for moral failure, Final Destination suggested that death was arbitrary. You didn't die because you had sex, did drugs, or broke the rules. You died because you were meant to. This nihilistic view resonated with a generation increasingly skeptical of cause and effect moralizing, especially in a media landscape saturated with sanitized narratives. Final Destination made space for a bleaker, but perhaps more honest, perspective on life's unpredictability. As years passed and sequels followed, the original film maintained a cult status. It is still frequently cited in academic discussions on horror theory, determinism, and the cultural implications of fate. Even outside academia, it's referenced in podcasts, YouTube commentary, and documentaries that explore film history and horror's role in reflecting societal anxieties. The continued production of Final Destination sequels over the next 2 decades, each with its own elaborate death sequences and philosophical musings, speaks to the enduring appeal of its core concept. The making of Final Destination was as unusual and fascinating as the film itself. From its origins as an unproduced television script to the intricate filming of elaborate death scenes, the behind-the-scenes story of the movie reveals a creative process filled with risk-taking, innovation, and collaboration. It was a production that challenged conventional horror filmmaking, blending practical effects with psychological suspense, all while pushing the boundaries of how fate and death could be portrayed cinematically. The concept for Final Destination began as a spec script written by Jeffrey Reddick for the television show The X-Files. Reddick originally intended it as an episode where agents Mulder and Scully would investigate a man who escapes death, only to be pursued by a supernatural force. However, the script never made it to the screen in that format. Instead, the idea was adapted and developed into a feature film by Reddick, along with Glenn Morgan and James Wong, 2 writers with their own history on The X-Files. Morgan and Wong took on producing and directing duties, with Wong ultimately directing the film. This X-Files DNA is deeply embedded in Final Destination's structure and tone. The film's mysterious, paranoid atmosphere, procedural elements, and philosophical undertones reflect the sensibilities of its creators. Pre-production involved careful planning, particularly in how death itself would be portrayed. Since death in the film is an invisible antagonist, the filmmakers had to find creative ways to show its presence without giving it a form. They relied on environmental cues, shadows, gusts of wind, flickering lights, to suggest its presence. This approach required close collaboration between the director, cinematographer, set designers, and special effects teams to ensure that each scene conveyed a subtle but mounting sense of dread. One of the most memorable sequences in the film is the plane crash premonition that opens the story. This scene was both technically complex and emotionally intense. The production team built a life-size mock-up of a Boeing 747 fuselage on a gimbal, allowing it to tilt and shake to simulate turbulence and structural failure. Explosions, fire effects, and debris were added to heighten the realism. Devon Sawa, playing Alex, had to perform in a chaotic environment filled with practical effects, flashing lights, and moving parts, all while maintaining his character's growing panic. The result was a visceral, immersive scene that immediately pulled audiences into the terror of the narrative. Interestingly, this scene was so realistic that it reportedly caused discomfort among some viewers who had experienced flight trauma. The film was primarily shot in British Columbia, Canada, taking advantage of the province's tax incentives and versatile locations. Vancouver and surrounding areas served as stand-ins for the fictional town of Mount Abraham, New York. Several scenes, including the school, the memorial, and the funeral home, were filmed in real locations rather than on studio sets, giving the movie a grounded and relatable feel. One notable location was the high school used in the film. It was the same building featured in other productions, repurposed through clever set design and camera work to suit the needs of Final Destination's eerie tone. A major behind-the-scenes challenge was designing the film's intricate death scenes. Rather than relying on traditional slasher violence, the filmmakers crafted chain reaction sequences that required precise timing, camera angles, and prop placement. For example, the bathroom death of Todd Wagner involved a complicated series of elements: water leaking from a toilet, a slick bathtub, a clothesline cord, and the way Todd slips and becomes entangled. The scene had to be rehearsed and storyboarded meticulously, using both practical effects and camera tricks. The crew even developed custom rigs to simulate the movement of objects and liquids in specific directions. This attention to physical cause and effect gave each death a sense of logic and inevitability, even as it felt supernatural. Many of these sequences involved stunt work, which brought its own set of difficulties. Safety was a top priority, particularly in scenes where actors had to interact with potentially dangerous setups. Seann William Scott's character's death, involving a steel beam that decapitates him, was filmed using a combination of stunt doubles, practical models, and digital effects. While computer-generated imagery was used sparingly in the film, it became necessary for moments where practical methods couldn't safely achieve the desired result. Nevertheless, most of the film's tension was achieved through traditional filmmaking techniques, which gave it a tactile and realistic quality that audiences responded to. Todd's scenes as the enigmatic mortician William Blodworth added another layer of production complexity. His scenes were filmed in an actual morgue set, designed to be both clinical and gothic. The use of lighting and shadows in these scenes was particularly deliberate, with the cinematographer employing low-key lighting to create an atmosphere of quiet dread. Todd improvised several lines and gestures, bringing a theatrical quality to his character that enhanced the film's metaphysical themes. His deep voice and calm demeanor were emphasized through strategic camera placement and long takes, giving his performance a hypnotic quality. Director James Wong made several stylistic decisions that set Final Destination apart. He often used long takes and slow camera movements to build tension, rather than relying on jump scares. His approach allowed the suspense to develop naturally, encouraging viewers to scan each frame for potential threats. Wong was also heavily involved in the editing process, ensuring that the pacing remained tight and that each death sequence felt earned. The editing team had to balance suspense, misdirection, and payoff, creating a rhythm that kept audiences on edge without becoming predictable. Another notable behind-the-scenes element was the involvement of the music and sound design teams, even in the early stages of filming. Since death was invisible, sound became a crucial tool in signaling its presence. A specific whooshing sound effect was developed to accompany moments when death's influence became apparent. The sound team used a mix of low-frequency tones and reversed audio samples to create an eerie, almost subconscious sense of danger. During filming, placeholder sound effects were sometimes played on set to guide actors in their reactions, helping them perform against an unseen force. Casting was also a carefully curated process. Devon Sawa was brought on after his performance in Idle Hands caught the attention of the producers. Ollie Larder was cast due to her ability to portray strength and vulnerability in equal measure. The chemistry between the cast members was intentionally tested during rehearsals, as the filmmakers wanted the friendships and tensions to feel organic. During downtime, the actors spent time together off-set to build rapport, which translated into more believable on-screen relationships. The plot of Final Destination unfolds with a deliberate, suspense-driven structure that balances unpredictability with a creeping sense of inevitability. It begins with a simple, relatable premise: teenagers preparing for a school trip to Paris, but quickly spirals into a nightmarish exploration of fate, mortality, and the illusion of control. The narrative architecture of the film is as methodical as the invisible antagonist at its center, with each scene strategically building tension, character development, and philosophical weight. This structure allows the audience to not only engage with the story on a visceral level but also contemplate deeper existential questions as the plot progresses. The opening act of Final Destination sets the stage with remarkable efficiency. Alex Browning, a high school senior, boards a plane to Paris with his classmates for a school trip. During the boarding process, a series of subtle but ominous signs begin to unsettle him. A broken latch on the overhead bin, a baby crying, and an eerie silence all contribute to his growing anxiety. Once seated on the plane, Alex experiences a vivid and horrifying vision of the aircraft exploding midair shortly after takeoff. He awakens to find himself back in his seat before the plane has departed. Panicked, he causes a commotion and is forcibly removed from the flight, along with a handful of others involved in the scuffle. Moments later, the plane indeed explodes, just as Alex had envisioned. This moment serves as the film's inciting incident and is a masterclass in setting tone. It introduces the audience to the film's central conceit, that death has a plan, and Alex has somehow disrupted it. This disruption sets the narrative into motion, transforming what could have been a traditional survivor's story into a tightly woven thriller where survival itself becomes a form of defiance against the natural order. What follows is the film's second act, which establishes the rules of death's design and explores how the survivors grapple with the trauma of their narrow escape. At first, the group, including Clear Rivers, Carter Horton, Terry Chaney, Billy Hitchcock, and others, attempts to return to normal life. But when Todd Wagner, Alex's best friend, dies in a freak accident that mirrors the circumstances of the plane crash vision, it becomes clear that something larger is at play. Alex begins to piece together the idea that death is correcting its mistake, claiming the survivors in the order they were originally meant to die. This realization introduces a procedural element to the narrative. Alex, with the support of Clear, tries to understand and predict the pattern of deaths. This investigative thread gives the plot momentum and allows the audience to become detectives alongside the characters. Each subsequent death confirms Alex's theory and raises the stakes. The deaths are not random. They are carefully orchestrated, a sequence of cause and effect that mimics the rigidity of fate itself. This portion of the narrative balances suspense with exposition, as the characters seek knowledge not just to survive, but to comprehend the force that hunts them. The structure of the film is unique in that it lacks a traditional antagonist. There is no masked killer, no creature lurking in the shadows. Instead, the enemy is death itself, an unseen, omnipresent force. This absence of a tangible villain forces the characters to fight against inevitability rather than a physical threat. It also shifts the horror from physical to psychological. The suspense derives not from when or where the killer will strike, but how the environment itself might turn against a character at any moment. This element turns a film into a constant exercise in anticipation. Audiences scan each frame for clues, trying to outguess the film's invisible killer. One of the most effective structural tools the film uses is misdirection. Each death sequence is preceded by a build-up filled with red herrings. For example, a character may narrowly avoid slipping on water or dodging a falling object, only to be killed moments later by an entirely different chain of events. This keeps the audience guessing and heightens the sense of unease. It also mirrors the unpredictability of life itself. Just when you think you've evaded danger, another threat emerges from an unseen angle. As the survivors continue to die in increasingly complex and ironic ways, the plot becomes a meditation on the futility of control. Carter Horton, the arrogant jock who refuses to believe in death's design, finds himself unable to escape when his car stalls on a train track. Billy Hitchcock, the most affable member of the group, dies abruptly from a flying piece of shrapnel. These deaths are not only shocking but thematically resonant. They serve as grim reminders that no amount of preparation or denial can stop what is preordained. The climax of the film takes place after Alex figures out that Death's plan is not fixed, but can be momentarily disrupted. He realizes that he was not the last to die in the original vision. Clear was. This twist reframes the narrative and gives Alex one last chance to act. He rushes to save Clear from a fire caused by a downed power line and a sequence of dangerous mishaps. The climax combines action with emotional stakes as Alex confronts not only death but his guilt, fear, and need for redemption. He manages to save Clear, seemingly breaking the chain. The resolution, or what seems like it, comes 6 months later in Paris, where Alex, Clear, and Carter reunite. Their sense of victory is short-lived. As they discuss whether they've truly beaten death, a series of events suggests otherwise. The final moments of the film reintroduce the tension with a sudden, violent payoff. A sign swings down and Carter pushes Alex out of the way, only to have the sign fly back and kill him instead. The screen cuts to black. This ending reaffirms the film's central theme: death may be delayed, but never defeated. This narrative arc, from vision to disruption, from investigation to doomed resistance, gives Final Destination its unique structure. It is episodic in nature, with each death forming a chapter, yet these episodes are tied together by an overarching philosophical narrative. The progression from individual fear to collective fatalism allows the characters and the audience to evolve together. The story's structure emphasizes inevitability without becoming monotonous, thanks to its shifting focus from who will die next to how and why. The pacing of the film is another crucial structural strength. It begins with high energy, dips into mystery and investigation, builds tension with each death, and ends with a bleak return to uncertainty. There are no filler scenes. Every moment contributes to character, theme, or suspense. The film's economy of storytelling keeps it tightly focused, which enhances the horror. By refusing to offer easy answers or a true resolution, the narrative leaves audiences unsettled long after the credits roll. The narrative of Final Destination is not only compelling for its plot mechanics, but also for its refusal to conform to conventional horror storytelling. It inverts the genre's expectations, placing characters in a world where morality is irrelevant and survival is arbitrary. This structural choice makes the film not just a thrill ride, but a thought experiment. Can one ever truly escape fate? And if so, at what cost? Final Destination's answer, delivered through its meticulous and suspenseful narrative structure, is both chilling and unforgettable. Beneath its surface of suspense, gore, and tension, Final Destination is layered with rich thematic material and symbolic elements that elevate it beyond the confines of typical teen horror. While the film may at first appear to be a clever exercise in creative death scenes, it is, in reality, a philosophical meditation on fate, mortality, human agency, and the illusion of control. It explores how people respond to the certainty of death, how belief systems influence behavior, and how fear of the unknown shapes the human experience. Through recurring motifs, narrative choices, and character decisions, Final Destination constructs a symbolic framework that invites reflection on life, death, and the delicate threads that connect the two. At its core, the film is a study of fate versus free will. The inciting incident, Alex's vision of the plane crash, challenges the idea that the future is set in stone. His decision to act on the premonition causes a divergence in the expected timeline, allowing him and a few others to escape death. Yet, as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that fate does not accept this deviation lightly. Death, as a force, begins to systematically correct what it perceives as an error. This sets up the film's central philosophical tension. Can destiny be changed, or is every attempt to resist it futile? Alex represents the human instinct to fight back against inevitability. He embodies the desire to assert control over one's future, even in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. His journey is symbolic of the eternal struggle between human autonomy and predestined outcomes. He believes that if he can just understand the pattern, he can break it. But every success he achieves seems only to delay, not prevent, the final outcome. This echoes classical literature and tragedy, where attempts to avoid prophecy often lead directly to its fulfillment. In this way, Final Destination joins a long tradition of storytelling that explores the paradox of resistance. The harder one tries to escape fate, the more entangled one becomes in its design. The film also explores the theme of mortality and the human confrontation with death. Unlike traditional horror films where death is externalized as a monster, killer, or creature, Final Destination internalizes death. It becomes part of the environment, part of the air the characters breathe. This makes it more pervasive and personal. Every object, every space, becomes a potential source of fatality. This omnipresence of death reflects how, in real life, mortality is not something we can distance ourselves from. It is always present, whether acknowledged or not. Each character in the film represents a different psychological response to the awareness of death. Clear Rivers accepts death's inevitability, but seeks to find meaning in survival. Carter Horton denies it outright, acting recklessly and challenging death in a bid to prove his dominance. Billy Hitchcock exhibits a fatalistic acceptance, masking his fear with humor. Todd Wagner, caught between disbelief and dread, tries to move forward without fully acknowledging the danger. These reactions mirror real-world behaviors when people confront loss, trauma, or the concept of mortality. Some fight, some flee, some rationalize. The film structure gives space to each of these reactions, inviting viewers to reflect on their own beliefs and fears. One of the most potent symbols in the film is the concept of the design. Alex discovers that death follows a sequence, a pattern, and that each person is dying in the order they would have on the plane. This structure symbolizes the human need to find order in chaos. We search for meaning in accidents, patterns in randomness. It's the same impulse behind religion, science, and storytelling, to make sense of what otherwise feels incomprehensible. In the film, the characters cling to the idea of a design because it gives them something to fight against. If there is a pattern, there is a chance to disrupt it. Yet, even this design is a construct, a metaphor for our desire to impose logic on the illogical. The symbolism of death itself in the film is also worth exploring. Rather than appearing as a cloaked figure or traditional Grim Reaper, death is personified through movement, wind, and shadows. It is silent, methodical, and ever-present. By removing a physical form, the filmmakers underscore that death is not something that can be confronted in a literal sense. It cannot be shot, outsmarted, or physically escaped. It is part of the natural order, an inevitable conclusion to all life. The characters are not being punished for sins or poor choices. They are simply out of place in the timeline of fate. This makes death in Final Destination more impartial and chilling than in most horror films. Another recurring symbol is glass. Reflections, windows, and transparent surfaces are used throughout the film to signify the thin veil between life and death. Mirrors often distort the characters' images, suggesting that their identities and fates are in flux. In one scene, a reflection in a computer monitor warns of an impending death. In another, the shattering of glass coincides with a character's demise. This motif suggests that death is always just on the other side, waiting, watching. It also implies that reality itself is fragile and subject to abrupt change. Air and wind are also important symbolic elements. In nearly every scene preceding a character's death, a gust of wind or a subtle shift in the air signals death's presence. This recurring environmental cue reinforces the idea that death is everywhere and that its touch can be felt even when it cannot be seen. Wind is invisible, yet powerful, just like the force that hunts the characters. It moves through the film like a ghost, linking scenes and deaths together with a quiet, unrelenting presence. The film's approach to causality also serves as symbolic commentary. Each death is not the result of a single cause but a chain of events: water dripping, a door left open, a spark from a frayed wire. This symbolizes how life itself is a chain of interconnected decisions and accidents. It also critiques the illusion of control. Characters believe they can change their fates by making better choices or staying alert, but the sheer complexity of life's mechanics makes true control impossible. Everything is a domino, and once the first one falls, the rest follow with mechanical certainty. Beyond fate and mortality, the film touches on themes of survivors' guilt and trauma. Alex becomes obsessed with saving others not only out of a desire to beat death, but also to absolve himself of guilt. He questions whether he was meant to die, and if his survival came at the cost of others. This inner turmoil represents the psychological toll of surviving traumatic events, where the burden of being spared becomes its own form of punishment. Claire shares this burden, having lost her family and bonded with Alex over shared isolation. Their relationship, while understated, becomes a symbol of human connection in the face of cosmic indifference. The funeral home scene featuring William Blodworth, played by Todd, serves as a philosophical anchor for the film's themes. Blodworth, acting as a sort of Greek chorus or oracle figure, tells the survivors that death doesn't like to be cheated, and that you can't cheat death. Final Destination's visual style plays a critical role in its lasting impact. From the film's first frames to its final moments, the visual storytelling is carefully constructed to enhance its themes of inevitability, paranoia, and dread. The cinematography does more than simply capture action. It reinforces the characters' psychological states, guides the audience's attention to hidden threats, and creates a sustained atmosphere of discomfort. While the film may appear conventional on the surface, its look and visual rhythm are integral to making the unseen antagonist, death, feel real, ever-present, and inescapable. The cinematographer responsible for Final Destination's distinctive visual style was Robert McLaughlin. Working closely with director James Wong, McLaughlin developed a visual language rooted in tension and quiet suspense rather than flashy camera tricks. Instead of resorting to frenetic handheld shots or jarring zooms, the camera in Final Destination tends to move with purpose, often gliding slowly through spaces. These slow tracking shots create an eerie sense of inevitability, as if the camera itself is being pulled forward by an unseen force. This technique aligns the visual rhythm with the film's core concept, that the characters are being drawn toward a fixed destiny. Lighting in the film is consistently used to set a cold, detached mood. Much of the lighting is low-key and desaturated, leaning heavily on blues, grays, and neutral tones. This color palette emphasizes the lifeless, sterile nature of the environments, whether it's a high school hallway, a morgue, or a suburban home. By stripping warmth from the visuals, the filmmakers visually reinforce the sense that death is never far. Moments of emotional vulnerability, such as conversations between Alex and Clear, are sometimes lit with softer edges and warmer tones, but even then, shadows remain present. This careful control of lighting allows emotional shifts to feel subtle but impactful. The film also makes extensive use of shadow and contrast. Shadows often stretch unnaturally or linger just a bit too long, suggesting the presence of something invisible but powerful. In scenes where death is near, lighting is often motivated from off-screen sources, like street lamps, flickering bulbs, or candlelight, casting harsh, shifting shadows across characters' faces. The shadow of a fan blade, the darkness at the edge of a hallway, or the slow movement of a curtain in the breeze all serve as visual cues that death is watching, waiting. These choices heighten suspense and give even ordinary spaces a sinister quality. The use of space and composition throughout the film deserves special attention. Many scenes are composed with a sense of isolation and imbalance. Characters are often framed alone, even when they are in crowded environments, suggesting psychological separation from those around them. Negative space is frequently employed, leaving parts of the frame empty or ominously open. This technique builds subconscious tension, making viewers feel as though something might emerge from the background or that the world itself is collapsing inward. In sequences leading up to a death, the framing becomes tighter and more claustrophobic, trapping characters within their environments both physically and emotionally. One of the most defining aspects of Final Destination's cinematography is its use of foreshadowing within the frame. Objects associated with death, knives, scissors, wires, flammable materials, are subtly introduced into the background of shots before becoming fatal instruments. These visual breadcrumbs train the audience to be hyper-aware of their surroundings, mirroring the characters' growing paranoia. The camera lingers slightly too long on seemingly mundane objects, inviting viewers to anticipate their role in the next chain reaction disaster. This method turns every frame into a potential threat, transforming passive viewing into active scanning. Audiences are never allowed to relax because the environment itself becomes the enemy. Camera angles and movements are also strategically employed to create discomfort. Low angles often make the environment feel imposing or off-kilter, while high angles are used to diminish the characters, making them appear vulnerable and small. Dutch tilts are rare but effective when used, such as during moments of realization or panic, when the world seems literally tilted off its axis. Dolly shots, especially those that push in slowly on a character's face, are used to emphasize isolation, dread, or sudden understanding. The camera movement remains mostly smooth and deliberate, avoiding jumpy edits or disorienting shifts. This allows the tension to build naturally, without calling attention to the filmmaking itself. Visual motifs recur throughout the film to reinforce its themes. One of the most prominent is the use of reflections. Mirrors, windows, glass doors, and other reflective surfaces frequently appear in key scenes. These reflections often distort the characters or present them from unfamiliar angles, suggesting duality, unseen layers, and the looming presence of death. Sometimes, reflections show things that the characters do not see directly, hinting at fate's influence. This motif supports the idea that reality itself is not always what it seems, and that death may be watching from angles we cannot perceive. The color palette remains consistent throughout the film, serving a symbolic function as well. Blues and grays dominate, giving the film a cold, almost funereal tone. These colors visually communicate the absence of life and the looming presence of death. Red is used sparingly, often reserved for moments of extreme danger or violence, such as the blood following a death scene or a flashing warning light. This controlled use of color makes those moments stand out and reinforces the viewer's conditioned response to associate red with impending doom. In terms of special effects, Final Destination strikes a balance between practical and digital techniques. Practical effects are favored whenever possible, particularly in the complex death sequences. Water flowing across a bathroom floor, sparks igniting near flammable substances, or mechanical malfunctions are all staged with real materials, lending a tactile sense of realism. When digital effects are used, such as in the plane explosion or certain enhancements to death scenes, they are blended carefully into the environment. The visual effects never feel exaggerated or cartoonish. They are grounded, often invisible, serving the story rather than distracting from it. One of the film's most memorable visual moments is the plane crash premonition. This scene combines disorienting camera movement, flashing emergency lighting, close-up reactions, and visual chaos to simulate the disintegration of order. It's a visual symphony of panic, designed to overwhelm both the characters and the audience. The use of real practical sets, combined with visual effects and quick cuts, creates a visceral, immersive experience. The camera moves with the same energy as the panicked passengers, pulling the audience into the terror rather than observing from a safe distance. Sound in Final Destination is not merely a technical component or background detail. It is a fundamental storytelling device that heightens tension, builds atmosphere, and personifies the film's central antagonist, death. While the film does not feature a bombastic, melody-driven score like some of its horror contemporaries, it uses sound design with deliberate restraint and intelligence. Every creak of a floorboard, distant rumble of thunder, or sudden silence functions with narrative intent. The absence of a visible killer means the audio landscape must do the heavy lifting to suggest danger and convey dread. In Final Destination, sound does not accompany the horror, it creates it. The original score for Final Destination was composed by Shirley Walker, an accomplished composer known for her work on Batman, the animated series, and Escape from LA. Her approach to this film was subtle, atmospheric, and emotionally grounded. Rather than leaning heavily on traditional horror cues such as jump scare stings or screeching violins, Walker opted for a soundscape that echoed the film's themes of inevitability, dread, and unseen forces. The score often features long, drawn-out tones, dissonant strings, and slow crescendos. These musical elements help build suspense gradually, allowing tension to simmer rather than spike. Walker's use of motifs and recurring musical phrases is especially effective. Certain sound cues accompany the approach of death, or the unraveling of the character's understanding of their fate. These motifs may not be overtly recognizable in a melodic sense, but they establish a psychological rhythm that conditions the audience. Over time, viewers begin to associate specific sonic textures, such as low droning or sharp ambient swells, with impending doom. This creates an auditory language that speaks to the subconscious, priming the viewer to feel anxiety even when nothing is visibly threatening on screen. One of the film's most chilling audio elements is its use of silence. Unlike many horror films that fill every second with ambient noise, Final Destination often lets scenes breathe. Silence in the film is not empty, it is heavy, filled with tension. The absence of sound can signal the calm before a chaotic death sequence, or it can amplify the faint creak of a door, the drip of a faucet, or the hum of a nearby appliance. These small, ordinary sounds are suddenly imbued with danger. By reducing the auditory clutter, the filmmakers force the audience to pay closer attention, often tricking them into expecting a scare that may not come, at least not immediately. Another key aspect of Final Destination sound design is its use of environmental audio to foreshadow death. In many scenes, ambient sounds shift before a death occurs. For example, Wind picks up unnaturally, light bulbs buzz and flicker, or faint mechanical hums begin to rise in volume. These aural cues function almost like a character themselves, signaling to both the audience and the characters that something is about to go wrong. It's as if the environment is becoming sentient, animated by death's will. These shifts often occur just before the chain of events that lead to a fatal accident, making them integral to the suspense structure. One of the most creative uses of sound in the film occurs during the elaborate death scenes. Rather than relying on explosive, sudden noises to create jump scares, the sound design carefully maps out the chain reactions that lead to each death. Take the bathroom scene with Todd, for example. The slow hiss of the water pipe, the quiet click of the toilet chain, and the slippery sound of feet on wet tile all come together in a rising symphony of dread. Each small sound is distinct and intentional. Together, they create a sensory buildup that culminates in tragedy. This meticulous layering of everyday sounds adds realism while also transforming the ordinary into the ominous. In Billy's death scene, the sound of the train becomes a dominant force. The pounding of the engine, the screeching metal, and the rattling of the ground beneath the character's feet all serve to create a sense of inevitability and chaos. When the metal shard decapitates him, the sound is not exaggerated but rather sharp and sudden, which increases its shock factor. The lead-up, filled with mechanical noise and rising panic, makes the quick, deadly payoff all the more jarring. Here, sound not only enhances the realism of the moment, but also emphasizes the randomness and brutality of death. The film also employs diegetic sound that originates from within the world of the characters, with great effect. Radios, televisions, sirens, and announcements all play roles in either warning the characters or reinforcing the film's themes. In one scene, a news report on TV provides background on the plane crash, its victims, and survivors. Later, music playing on a radio seems eerily relevant to the events unfolding, suggesting a cosmic alignment of details orchestrated by death itself. By integrating diegetic sound in this way, the filmmakers blur the line between the characters' reality and the metaphysical threat they face. Vocals, or the lack thereof, are also used effectively in the film. Characters' screams, gasps, and whispered conversations all contribute to a heightened sense of intimacy and vulnerability. The sound of Alex's breathing becomes a motif in several key scenes, especially when he is hiding or on the verge of a realization. This breath-focused soundscape creates an emotional connection with the character and places the audience directly in his mental space. It also subtly reminds viewers of life's fragility, how breath is the only thing separating the living from the dead. A unique auditory element in Final Destination is the use of backward or distorted sounds in moments of premonition or psychological stress. When Alex experiences his vision of the plane explosion, the soundscape is layered with twisted audio, voices in reverse, echoes of shouts, metallic groans, all combining to disorient the viewer. These abstract sound collages simulate the collapse of time and reality, reinforcing the idea that Alex is briefly outside the normal flow of time. These moments are some of the most unnerving in the film precisely because they move away from literal sound and toward the surreal. Outside of the score and ambient design, the film also features several licensed songs that anchor it in a specific cultural moment. Songs like John Denver's Rocky Mountain High are used not just as background music, but as ironic commentaries on the events. Denver's music, cheerful and reflective, is played during scenes where death is imminent. The fact that John Denver himself died in a plane crash adds another layer of symbolic meaning. These songs become auditory signposts, reminding characters and viewers alike that danger is ever present, even in moments of calm. The mix of natural and industrial sounds also plays a psychological role. In scenes set outdoors, like the drive-in sequence or the lakeside moment, natural sounds like birds, water, and wind are interspersed with mechanical ones, buzzing lights, humming power lines, or distant traffic. This combination suggests that death is not limited to human spaces. It infiltrates the natural world, or perhaps that nature itself is complicit in death's design. The constant low-level hum of electricity or machinery in the background creates a layer of unease that prevents the audience from feeling truly relaxed, even during relatively peaceful scenes. When Final Destination was released in 2000, it was met with a mix of intrigue, surprise, and skepticism. Critics and audiences were not entirely sure what to expect from a horror film that featured no visible villain and hinged on the abstract concept of death itself as an antagonist. Yet despite its unconventional premise, or perhaps because of it, the film quickly gained traction. It performed solidly at the box office, earning over $100 million worldwide against a relatively modest budget. What began as a dark, curious thriller evolved into a cultural phenomenon and one of the defining horror titles of its decade. The initial critical response to Final Destination was divided. Many professional critics were unsure how to categorize the film. Some praised it for its originality, inventive death scenes, and psychological suspense. They saw it as a refreshing deviation from the slasher template that had dominated the horror landscape of the 80s and 90s. Rather than relying on a masked killer or demonic entity, Final Destination presented death as an invisible, omnipresent force, something that could not be fought, reasoned with, or escaped. This existential twist intrigued reviewers who were looking for more cerebral horror narratives. However, others were less enthusiastic. Some critics felt the film relied too heavily on elaborate death sequences and that the plot was thin outside of its high-concept premise. A few described it as a one-trick pony, arguing that once the novelty of the chain reaction deaths wore off, there was little else to sustain emotional engagement. Others questioned the performances of the lead actors, suggesting that the emotional depth of the characters sometimes fell short of the intensity demanded by the story. While the film's tone was praised for being consistently tense, some reviews noted that its dialogue and character development felt undercooked. Despite this polarized critical response, audience reactions were generally more favorable. Horror fans in particular appreciated the film's originality and the anxiety-inducing suspense it generated. Many viewers were fascinated by the concept of fate being a literal force that could not be avoided. The film's methodical pacing, which built tension through foreshadowing and implication rather than gore and jump scares, resonated with viewers tired of formulaic horror tropes. Fan discussions quickly began to focus on the intricacies of the death sequences, treating them almost like puzzles or riddles to be solved. Each new trap-like death became a source of speculation and fascination. Test screenings for the film also revealed the impact of audience feedback. In fact, the original ending was red-hot based on audience reactions. The initial version included a more romantic and emotionally conclusive finale in which Claire was pregnant with Alex's child after his death. This version was ultimately scrapped in favor of a more ambiguous and open-ended conclusion, which audiences felt better fit the film's dark tone. The revised ending, set in Paris, added an additional layer of uncertainty and tension, suggesting that Death's plan was still unfolding. This change is often cited as one of the smarter post-production decisions influenced by public reception. The film's success at the box office further cemented its positive reception. While it did not break records, it performed well enough to validate the creation of an entirely new franchise. Audiences returned not just for the horror but for the philosophical question the series posed. What if death had a plan, and every action you took was already accounted for? This idea proved compelling enough to warrant multiple sequels, each of which leaned further into the spectacle of creative death sequences. Final Destination's financial success demonstrated that horror could thrive without needing a tangible monster, provided that the concept and execution were strong. In terms of accolades, Final Destination did not dominate award circuits, but it found recognition within genre-specific spaces. It received several nominations at horror and science fiction festivals, and its innovative approach earned it a loyal fanbase within the horror community. Although mainstream award shows typically overlooked it, the film became a staple in best-of horror lists, particularly those focusing on high-concept thrillers or supernatural suspense. Over time, its reputation improved among critics as well, with retrospective reviews crediting it for being ahead of its time and sparking a trend of fatalistic horror storytelling. Not all feedback was glowing, however. Some cultural critics express concern over the film's almost gleeful focus on elaborate, violent deaths. They argued that the film sometimes veered into the territory of death as spectacle, trivializing the emotional weight of loss in favor of shock value. Others critiqued the film's treatment of grief and trauma, suggesting that it occasionally glossed over the psychological consequences of the characters' experiences. While the film introduces the concept of survivor's guilt, some critics felt it did not fully explore its emotional implications. These criticisms, while valid, were often balanced by praise for the film's thematic ambition and technical execution. A particular point of discussion was the film's depiction of fate and agency. Viewers and critics alike debated whether the movie's message was nihilistic or cautionary. Some interpreted it as a meditation on the futility of trying to escape one's destiny, while others saw it as a metaphor for the unpredictability of life and the importance of seizing the present moment. The ambiguity of the film's stance on these issues sparked ongoing discussion, contributing to its lasting appeal. Rather than providing clear answers, Final Destination posed questions that encouraged viewers to reflect on their own beliefs about control, mortality, and destiny. The film also stirred minor controversy in certain circles due to its use of airline disaster imagery so soon after real-life aviation tragedies. While it was released before September 11th, the plane explosion in the opening act made some viewers uncomfortable, especially as global anxieties about air travel increased in the early 2000s. In some markets, marketing materials were toned down or altered, and there were brief conversations about the ethical implications of showing such a scenario in a commercial horror film. However, this criticism remained relatively isolated and did not significantly affect the film's popularity or legacy. On online forums, early fan websites, and later social media platforms, the film gained a cult following. Audiences began cataloging the hidden clues leading up to each death, analyzing each sequence for patterns, foreshadowing, and symbolism. The death cheat logic became a game in itself. Fans speculated endlessly about how they would survive if placed in similar situations, sharing theories and interpretations. This level of viewer engagement showed how deeply the film had embedded itself into the imagination of its audience. It wasn't just scary. It was intellectually engaging and emotionally resonant in a way that transcended its modest beginnings. The legacy of Final Destination is both unique and far-reaching. What began as a modestly budgeted horror film with an unconventional premise evolved into one of the most influential and recognizable franchises in modern horror. It didn't just introduce a new antagonist to the genre, it introduced a new way of thinking about horror itself. Instead of focusing on a killer with a face and motive, it portrayed death as an invisible, inevitable force, turning the rules of traditional slasher films inside out. This concept left a significant mark on both the industry and the audiences who consumed it, spawning not only direct sequels, but also shifting the framework of how suspense and fatalism were represented on screen. Final Destination's most visible legacy is its long-running franchise. The success of the original film quickly led to a series of sequels, each building upon the central idea that death has a plan and that any attempt to escape it merely delays the inevitable. Final Destination 2 through 5 expanded the universe, introduced new characters and even more elaborate death sequences, and delved deeper into the concept of interconnected events and cause and effect. These films weren't just cash grabs. They refined the mechanics of the original concept, with each installment raising the bar for tension, creativity, and narrative complexity. Final Destination 5 in particular received acclaim for its unexpected twist, which cleverly tied the story back to the first film, creating a cyclical narrative that impressed longtime fans. One of the most enduring aspects of the series is its signature style of suspense, the use of chain reactions and environmental storytelling to foreshadow death. Rather than relying solely on jump scares or supernatural visuals, the films create elaborate Rube Goldberg-like scenarios where everyday objects become potential murder weapons. A nail, a coffee mug, a cracked fish tank, anything can become lethal when death is orchestrating the scene. This meticulous setup and payoff style has influenced countless horror films and thrillers, many of which have tried to replicate the same sense of inevitability and dread through visual storytelling. Even outside of the horror genre, Final Destination's influence can be seen in how filmmakers approach tension and audience anticipation. In a broader cultural sense, the film reshaped how people view accidents and coincidences. After its release, it wasn't uncommon to hear someone jokingly say they were having a Final Destination moment when narrowly avoiding an accident or seeing a strange chain of events unfold. The movie's core idea, that death is unavoidable and perhaps even sentient, struck a psychological nerve. It introduced a kind of secular mythology for the modern age, one that didn't rely on demons, ghosts, or ancient curses, but rather on the cold inevitability of mortality. This theme resonated with viewers in a time of increasing technological complexity and existential anxiety. Suddenly, death didn't need a face, it just needed a pattern. Memes, viral content, and internet culture have also played a significant role in sustaining the film's legacy. Clips of death scenes from the franchise have circulated widely on social media platforms for years. The film's infamous logging truck accident from Final Destination 2, for example, has become a modern urban legend, cited frequently as the reason people avoid driving behind trucks carrying logs or heavy equipment. This specific scene has had such a psychological impact that it's transcended film and entered everyday behavior, with countless people admitting to changing their driving habits out of fear triggered by the movie. It's a rare instance where fiction has noticeably altered real-world behavior in a lasting way. The Final Destination franchise also paved the way for new horror narratives focused on inevitability and causality. While earlier films in the genre dealt with fate in more metaphorical terms, Final Destination brought the concept front and center. It asked, what if fate wasn't just an idea, but an active force with its own rules and logic? This approach has inspired a range of films that deal with destiny, time loops, and the butterfly effect, including movies like Time Crimes, Triangle, Coherence, and Happy Death Day. Each of these films, in different ways, owes a debt to Final Destination's pioneering structure and willingness to play with abstract horror. Another important aspect of the film's legacy is how it redefined the rules of character safety in horror. Traditionally, audiences could often guess which characters would survive based on genre archetypes: the final girl, the comic relief, the innocent outsider. Final Destination disrupted this formula by making death itself the antagonist. No one could be killed too early or too late unless death's plan allowed it. This unpredictability created a new kind of suspense that didn't rely on character morality or narrative justice. Instead, the randomness of death made everyone equally vulnerable. This shift influenced not only other horror films but also television series like Lost and The 100, where fate and death are treated as impartial forces. The franchise also contributed to the careers of various actors and filmmakers. For some, appearing in a Final Destination film became a rite of passage within the genre. This series provided a platform for emerging talent, many of whom went on to more significant roles in television and cinema. Behind the camera, the franchise allowed directors and writers to experiment with visual storytelling, suspense, and thematic complexity. The success of these films demonstrated to studios that high-concept horror could be both commercially viable and critically engaging, helping to open the door for more ambitious and cerebral horror projects in the following decades. From a technical standpoint, the death sequences in Final Destination and its sequels raised the bar for practical effects and stunt choreography in horror. Each death scene required precise planning, timing, and execution, often blending practical effects with digital enhancements to create seamless and believable accidents. This dedication to realism, even within a supernatural premise, gave the franchise a level of authenticity that distinguished it from more fantastical horror fare. It also inspired future filmmakers to prioritize logistics and realism when crafting horror set pieces, proving that a meticulously designed scene could be just as terrifying as a jump scare. Final Destination also indirectly influenced the rise of procedural crime and disaster shows in the early 2000s. Series like CSI, Criminal Minds, and even Mythbusters adopted similar storytelling techniques, breaking down cause and effect, using forensic analysis, and dramatizing chain reactions. While these shows operate in different genres, the underlying appeal is the same: the thrill of understanding how a series of small events can lead to a catastrophic outcome. In many ways, Final Destination brought this analytical suspense to the forefront of popular media, showing that the process of death could be just as engaging as the event itself. Final Destination struck a profound chord with audiences when it was first released, and its resonance has only grown over time. Unlike many horror films that rely primarily on shock value or jump scares, Final Destination invited viewers into a psychological experience that played on deeply rooted fears, mortality, loss of control, and the unpredictability of fate. Audiences responded to the film on multiple levels, reflecting a mix of emotional, intellectual, and cultural reactions that have made it a lasting piece of cinema within its genre. One of the primary emotional responses from viewers was a heightened sense of anxiety about everyday life. The film's premise, that death is an unstoppable force targeting individuals in an inevitable sequence, tapped into universal fears. Many audience members reported feeling more cautious or even paranoid about seemingly mundane activities after watching the film. It led to a kind of hyper-awareness where people noticed small dangers around them that they had previously overlooked. This psychological imprint was so strong that some individuals admitted to changing their routines or habits, such as avoiding driving behind large trucks or being wary of seemingly innocuous objects like loose cords or faulty appliances. This increased vigilance connected to the film's detailed and inventive death sequences. Audiences were fascinated by the chain reaction nature of the fatalities, where one small event cascaded into a deadly accident. Viewers often found themselves analyzing scenes frame by frame, trying to predict what might happen next or how a character's actions could inadvertently lead to their demise. This interactive engagement made Final Destination a participatory experience, inviting viewers to puzzle out the mechanics of fate. In many cases, this led to group discussions, online debates, and fan theories, turning the film into a social phenomenon as much as a horror movie. The film also resonated deeply with people's existential concerns. For some, Final Destination was more than just a thriller, it was a meditation on mortality and the limits of human control. Audiences connected with the characters' desperate attempts to cheat death and survive, which mirrored their own hopes of overcoming life's unpredictability. This theme sparked reflection about fate and free will, prompting viewers to ask themselves whether life is governed by chance, design, or a mix of both. The film's ambiguity allowed each audience member to interpret its message in a way that aligned with their personal beliefs, making it a more intimate and thought-provoking experience. Different generations interpreted Final Destination through their own cultural lenses as well. For younger viewers at the time, particularly teenagers and young adults, the film's portrayal of death as a looming but unseen force tapped into feelings of vulnerability common to that age group. The characters were mostly peers navigating school, friendships, and early adulthood, situations familiar to the film's core demographic. This identification made the horror more immediate and personal. At the same time, older audiences appreciated the film's psychological depth and dark humor, which provided a sophisticated counterbalance to the visceral scares. Audiences also reflected on the film's exploration of survivors' guilt and trauma. The characters' struggles with the weight of knowing they have escaped death temporarily, but not permanently, resonated with viewers who have experienced loss or tragedy in their own lives. The emotional roller coaster of hope, fear, denial, and resignation that the characters endure felt authentic to many, lending emotional credibility to the film's supernatural premise. This aspect helped elevate Final Destination beyond mere spectacle, allowing it to touch on human experiences of grief and mortality. The film's narrative structure, which built tension through foreshadowing and slow revelation rather than sudden shocks, also influenced how audiences engaged with it. Many found themselves rewatching the film to catch subtle clues and hidden details, enjoying the mental challenge as much as the emotional thrill. This engagement fostered a long-lasting connection between the audience and the film. It wasn't just about being scared in the moment, it was about unraveling a puzzle over time. This layered approach made Final Destination a film that viewers returned to again and again, discovering new nuances with each viewing. In the years following its release, Final Destination also became a staple of horror fandom culture. Fans developed elaborate discussions about the rules governing Death's plan and debated the logic behind the deaths and survivors. The film inspired fanfiction, fan art, and online communities dedicated to exploring every facet of its universe. This fandom engagement demonstrated how deeply the film had embedded itself in the cultural imagination. It was no longer just a movie. It was a shared experience, a collective narrative that invited interpretation and participation. The film's impact on audience emotions was not limited to fear and anxiety. Many viewers also experienced moments of dark humor and irony, which provided a unique tonal balance. The absurdity of some deaths, combined with the characters' often futile attempts to outsmart fate, created a grim but sometimes playful atmosphere. This mix of horror and humor allowed audiences to process their fears in a more nuanced way. The levity helped prevent the film from becoming overwhelmingly bleak, while still maintaining a consistent undercurrent of dread. Final Destination also invited audiences to think about their own lives and relationships. The film's focus on a group of people connected by fate, some of whom barely knew each other before the events unfolded, highlighted themes of connection and isolation. Viewers often reflected on how fragile life is and how chance encounters or decisions can have profound consequences. The movie encouraged a greater appreciation for life's fleeting moments and the importance of human connection, even in the face of inevitable death. From a psychological perspective, Final Destination played on the concept of locus of control, the degree to which individuals believe they have power over events affecting them. The film challenged the idea of personal agency by showing characters caught in an unstoppable chain of events. Audiences grappled with the tension between wanting to believe in control and being confronted with the harsh reality of unpredictability. This tension made the film resonate on a deeper level, as it mirrored the human struggle to find meaning and order in a chaotic world. The film also held a mirror to cultural anxieties at the turn of the millennium. Released shortly before the events of 9/11, it inadvertently captured a zeitgeist marked by uncertainty, fear of sudden catastrophe, and a growing awareness of global fragility. Audiences at the time were grappling with their own sense of vulnerability, and Final Destination's themes of sudden death and fate felt especially poignant. This cultural context helped amplify the film's impact, making it feel both timely and timeless. Final Destination is often celebrated for its inventive plot and suspenseful death sequences, but beneath the surface, the film also presents interesting character development and arcs that contribute significantly to the story's emotional weight. Unlike traditional horror films that focus on the killer or supernatural villain, Final Destination places emphasis on the survivors' psychological and emotional journeys as they confront the inevitability of death. The characters' transformations, conflicts, and relationships form the human core of the film, allowing audiences to connect with them beyond their fates. The protagonist Alex Browning serves as the central figure driving the narrative and thematic exploration of the movie. Alex is introduced as a somewhat typical high school senior with a creative and rebellious streak, demonstrated by his passion for photography and his antagonistic relationship with his father. This rebelliousness hints at a deeper struggle for control in his life, a theme that becomes pivotal as he confronts the concept of fate. Alex's arc begins with disbelief and skepticism after the premonition of the plane crash, but as the deaths start occurring exactly as he foresaw, he shifts into a role of reluctant leader and protector. His transformation from a carefree teenager to a determined survivor who tries to outwit death adds emotional gravity to the film. Alex's journey is marked by isolation and a burden of responsibility. He becomes alienated from his peers and authority figures who dismiss his warnings, forcing him to rely on intuition and limited resources. This isolation underscores the loneliness inherent in his struggle against an invisible force. Despite this, Alex's character demonstrates resilience and resourcefulness, showing growth as he grapples with fear, doubt, and the weight of survival. His evolving relationship with Claire and the other survivors reflects his increasing maturity and empathy, moving from self-focus to more selfless concerns about others. Claire Roberts, the primary female lead, also experiences significant development throughout the film. She starts as a seemingly typical high school student, concerned primarily with social relationships and her identity. However, as the story progresses, Claire becomes a crucial ally to Alex, offering emotional support and practical assistance. Her arc highlights the theme of empowerment in the face of overwhelming odds. Claire transitions from passive acceptance of fate to active resistance, symbolizing a broader struggle for agency in a world governed by death. Her growing bond with Alex deepens the emotional stakes, adding a layer of romantic tension that enriches the narrative. Other characters in the film contribute unique perspectives on fear, denial, and acceptance. For instance, Clear Rivers represents a more experienced figure who understands the reality of death's plan through her previous survival. Her presence introduces a sense of inevitability and fatalism, contrasting with Alex's initial hopefulness. Clear's arc explores themes of trauma and survivor's guilt, showing how past experiences shape one's approach to danger. Her calm, sometimes resigned demeanor provides a counterpoint to the younger character's panic and denial. The dynamic between the characters also reveals different coping mechanisms in response to fear. Some, like Carolyn Dykstra, cling to optimism and logic, trying to rationalize the deaths and find a way out. Others, like Todd Wheeler, express anger and frustration, lashing out at those around them or giving in to despair. These varied emotional responses add realism to the story, making the characters' experiences more relatable. The interplay of hope, denial, and terror heightens the tension and drives the plot forward. Relationships between characters evolve as the story unfolds, often marked by moments of conflict, cooperation, and emotional vulnerability. The initial skepticism that many characters have toward Alex's warnings creates tension and distrust, which gradually shifts toward reluctant belief and collaboration. This transition reflects the broader theme of unity in the face of adversity. The characters learn to depend on each other, sharing information and trying to strategize survival, which adds depth to their interactions beyond the horror context. The film also uses the characters' arcs to explore themes of fate versus free will. As the survivors struggle to escape death, their choices become crucial plot points. Alex and Claire's efforts to intervene and alter the course of events demonstrate a belief in human agency, while other characters succumb to fatalism. This tension between control and inevitability drives much of the emotional conflict. The characters' attempts to rewrite destiny, despite knowing the risks, create a compelling narrative about hope and courage in the face of despair. Each death scene not only serves to heighten suspense, but also marks a turning point for the surviving characters. As friends and acquaintances fall victim to death's plan, the remaining survivors are forced to confront their mortality more directly. These losses impact their psychological state, deepening feelings of fear, guilt, and determination. For example, the deaths of characters like Valerie Lewis and Rory add emotional weight to the story, reminding both the audience and the survivors of what's at stake. These moments of loss reinforce the film's darker themes while also pushing characters to grow. Alex's relationship with his father also evolves subtly throughout the film. Initially strained and marked by misunderstanding, their dynamic reflects a common adolescent struggle for independence and recognition. As Alex faces death and tries to protect others, there is a sense of growing maturity that could have led to reconciliation if the story had continued beyond the film. This subplot, while understated, adds a layer of realism and emotional depth to the narrative, grounding the supernatural elements in everyday human experience. The supporting characters, while not as deeply developed, are crafted with distinct personalities that highlight different facets of human response to crisis. Teacher Ken Kavanaugh, for instance, serves as a figure of authority but also vulnerability, showing that no one is immune to death's reach. His skepticism and eventual acceptance mirror the audience's journey, grounding the supernatural premise in relatable human doubt. Similarly, characters like Carolyn and Rory provide touchpoints of friendship and camaraderie, emphasizing the social dimension of survival. The film's pacing allows for gradual character development amid escalating suspense. Scenes alternate between moments of intense action and quieter, introspective sequences where characters process what is happening. These quieter moments are crucial for building empathy and understanding motivations. For example, scenes where Alex and Claire discuss their fears or where Claire reveals her past experiences deepen the emotional texture of the film. This balance between horror and character-driven drama makes the story more engaging and multidimensional. Final Destination's costume and set design play crucial roles in establishing the film's atmosphere, character identities, and the overall mood that supports the narrative's tension. While the movie may not be known primarily for extravagant visual aesthetics, the deliberate choices made in costumes, makeup, and settings subtly reinforce themes of vulnerability, normalcy disrupted, and the looming presence of death. These elements work together to ground the supernatural premise in a believable world, making the horror more relatable and immediate. The costumes in Final Destination are carefully designed to reflect each character's personality, social status, and emotional state, helping to define them beyond the script. The protagonist Alex Browning's wardrobe is a prime example of this approach. His clothing, typically casual yet with an edgy flair, emphasizes his rebellious, creative nature. He often wears layered shirts and jackets with darker tones, which visually mark him as slightly apart from his peers. These choices suggest a character who is introspective and grappling with inner turmoil, fitting his role as someone who perceives and confronts death's plan before others. Claire Roberts' costumes evolve subtly throughout the film to reflect her transition from a typical high school student to an active survivor. Early on, Claire's clothing is fashionable and vibrant, consistent with a teenager engaged in social life. As the story progresses and the tone darkens, her wardrobe shifts to simpler, more practical outfits, symbolizing her growing seriousness and determination. This progression visually underscores her emotional arc and increasing maturity, aligning her external appearance with internal change. The supporting characters' costumes also serve to establish quick visual shorthand for their personalities and roles within the story. For example, Clear River's attire is more subdued and understated, reinforcing her role as a seasoned survivor who has endured trauma. Her simple, dark clothing contrasts with more colorful peers, visually separating her as someone marked by experience and loss. This use of costume helps communicate character backstory without extensive exposition. Makeup and hairstyling choices are similarly purposeful, emphasizing naturalistic looks that suit the film's contemporary high school setting. The characters appear realistically youthful, avoiding the polished or exaggerated appearances often seen in teen films. This approach grounds the story in a relatable reality, enhancing the film's psychological impact by making the characters feel like everyday people rather than stylized archetypes. Subtle use of makeup also helps to reflect emotional states, with tired eyes, pale complexions, or disheveled hair becoming more apparent as stress and fear intensify. Beyond individual costumes, the set design in Final Destination is instrumental in creating a believable world that heightens tension through its ordinary yet ominous environments. The film primarily takes place in familiar settings: a high school, a hospital, residential homes, and urban streets, which emphasizes the intrusion of death into everyday life. These locations are meticulously chosen and detailed to evoke a sense of normalcy that gradually unravels as the story progresses. The opening airport scene, where the initial plane crash premonition occurs, is a standout example of effective set design. The bustling, chaotic environment of the airport terminal contrasts sharply with the quiet dread that builds within Alex's vision. The crowded spaces filled with travelers, bright fluorescent lighting, and impersonal architecture create a sense of vulnerability amid the ordinary. This setting grounds the supernatural event in a recognizable, relatable context, intensifying its emotional impact. The high school setting is another critical location, designed to reflect both safety and impending danger. Classrooms, hallways, and common areas are depicted with authentic details such as lockers, posters, and school supplies, immersing viewers in a believable teenage world. However, the lighting and framing in these spaces often creates subtle unease, shadows in corners, tight shots of empty corridors, foreshadowing the looming threat. This duality between familiarity and menace enhances the suspense and underscores the theme that death can strike anywhere, even places associated with youth and life. Hospital and medical settings in the film are portrayed with a clinical, sterile aesthetic that contrasts with the emotional turmoil of the characters. Bright, harsh lighting, clean lines, and the omnipresence of medical equipment convey both the hope of survival and the cold inevitability of death. These environments serve as visual metaphors for the film's exploration of life's fragility and the thin line between recovery and loss. Scenes set in hospitals often heighten the tension by placing characters at the threshold between life and death in a setting that is both familiar and intimidating. Residential interiors, such as Alex's home and Claire's apartment, are designed to reflect the characters' personal worlds. Alex's home shows signs of familial tension and complexity. Disorganized rooms, scattered belongings, and muted color schemes suggest a troubled domestic atmosphere that parallels his emotional struggles. Claire's living space, by contrast, is more orderly and warm, signaling her grounded nature and role as an emotional anchor. These details help deepen character development and provide a backdrop against which personal conflicts and growth occur. The film also uses set design to enhance its signature chain reaction death sequences. Everyday objects and environments become instruments of fate, turning mundane spaces into arenas of suspense and danger. For instance, scenes involving kitchen appliances, elevators, or roadways are carefully constructed to maximize tension. The placement of objects, lighting, and camera angles emphasize potential hazards, inviting viewers to anticipate the unfolding tragedy. This approach not only reinforces the film's central theme but also showcases the creativity of the production design team. Lighting design throughout the film plays a significant role in shaping mood and atmosphere. The filmmakers use a mix of naturalistic and stylized lighting to create contrasts between safety and threat. Scenes with warm, soft lighting often denote moments of temporary calm or hope, while colder, harsher lighting underscores danger and foreboding. The interplay of light and shadow is used to heighten suspense and guide audience attention to key visual clues, contributing to the film's psychological tension. Color palettes in Final Destination are relatively muted, favoring earth tones, grays, and blues, which help convey a somber and ominous mood. These subdued colors support the film's themes of death and inevitability, avoiding the vibrancy often associated with teenage dramas. When brighter colors do appear, such as in clothing or props, they often serve to highlight characters or objects linked to impending doom. This subtle use of color symbolism adds an additional layer of meaning to the visual storytelling. Final Destination's dialogue and scriptwriting play a crucial role in shaping the film's tone, pacing, and emotional engagement. Unlike many horror films that rely heavily on jump scares or graphic violence, Final Destination uses its screenplay to build tension through carefully crafted conversations, character interactions, and well-timed exposition. The script balances moments of naturalistic dialogue with plot-driven exchanges, ensuring that the story unfolds smoothly while maintaining suspense and character depth. One of the defining qualities of the script is its economy. Dialogue is purposeful and rarely extraneous. The characters speak in a manner consistent with their age and personalities, which helps to ground the story in realism. Teenage characters use casual, conversational language peppered with humor and sarcasm, reflecting typical adolescent speech patterns without slipping into caricature or stereotypes. This authenticity in dialogue makes the characters relatable and helps audiences invest emotionally in their fates. The script's opening scenes introduce key characters and set up the central premise through sharp, concise exchanges. Alex Browning's premonition of the plane crash is communicated not only through visual effects but also through his frantic, urgent dialogue. His panic and desperation come across convincingly as he tries to warn fellow passengers and airport officials. This initial build-up through dialogue helps create immediate tension and hooks the audience into the mystery and impending danger. The film's dialogue effectively balances exposition with character development. Complex concepts such as death's design and the inevitability of fate are introduced through conversations, particularly involving Alex and Clear Rivers, who serves as a knowledgeable guide on the rules of survival. These exchanges avoid overly technical or confusing language, instead opting for clear, direct explanations that maintain narrative clarity without sacrificing intrigue. This approach keeps the audience informed while preserving the story's momentum. Memorable lines and exchanges within the script often carry double meanings or foreshadow events, enhancing the film's thematic depth. For instance, when characters joke about the order of death or casually dismiss warnings, these moments later gain weight as the story progresses. The script uses irony and dark humor to offset moments of high tension, providing brief relief while also reinforcing the film's ominous tone. This balance prevents the dialogue from becoming monotonous or overly heavy. The screenplay skillfully uses pacing and conversations to build suspense. Rapid-fire exchanges often occur during moments of crisis or heightened fear, mirroring the characters' frantic mental states. In contrast, slower, more deliberate dialogue takes place in quieter scenes, allowing characters to reflect, strategize, or bond. This variation in tempo contributes to the film's rhythm, preventing fatigue and maintaining audience engagement. It also mirrors the ebb and flow of tension and release that characterizes the horror genre. Humor is sparingly but effectively used in the dialogue to humanize characters and alleviate tension. Witty remarks, sarcastic comments, and playful banter help reveal personality traits and interpersonal dynamics. These moments also serve to make the characters more relatable and likable, increasing audience empathy and investment in their survival. Importantly, humor never undermines the seriousness of the situation, but rather complements it by showcasing characters' attempts to cope with fear and uncertainty. The script also employs subtext and implication in dialogue to suggest themes without overt explanation. Conversations often hint at characters' fears, doubts, or motivations beneath surface-level words. For example, casual remarks about luck, chance, or destiny resonate with the film's broader existential questions. This use of subtext enriches the narrative, inviting viewers to read between the lines and engage more deeply with the story's philosophical undercurrents. Dialogue between Alex and Claire is particularly important in building emotional resonance. Their interactions reveal vulnerability, trust, and growing affection, which adds layers of complexity beyond the central horror plot. The script balances moments of tenderness with tension, making their relationship believable and impactful. These exchanges provide a humanizing counterpoint to the supernatural threat and heighten the stakes by giving the audience personal reasons to care about the characters. The screenplay avoids heavy-handed exposition by using naturalistic dialogue to integrate necessary information. Characters learn about death's pattern and survival rules through conversations that feel organic rather than forced. This approach maintains the film's pace and keeps viewers engaged without confusion. The script's clarity in delivering plot points is a strength, ensuring that the story remains accessible while retaining its complexity. In addition to character dialogue, the screenplay also makes effective use of silence and nonverbal communication. Pauses, hesitations, and reactions convey unspoken fears and tensions, adding depth to scenes without relying solely on spoken words. These moments often build suspense by creating anticipation or highlighting the characters' emotional states. The balance between dialogue and silence demonstrates the script's awareness of pacing and mood. The writing also skillfully integrates foreshadowing through dialogue. Seemingly casual comments or jokes often hint at future events, encouraging audiences to pay close attention. This technique enhances rewatchability, as viewers may catch subtle clues they missed initially. It also contributes to the film's intricate narrative structure, where each piece fits into the larger puzzle of death's design. The script's handling of the horror elements through dialogue is subtle yet effective. Instead of relying on graphic descriptions or shocking revelations, the screenplay builds dread through anticipation and psychological tension. Characters' conversations about fear, fate, and mortality deepen the sense of impending doom. This thoughtful approach distinguishes Final Destination from more superficial slasher films, offering a more cerebral and emotionally resonant experience. The film's antagonist, death itself, is never personified through dialogue, which is a deliberate choice that maintains mystery and fear. The script allows the concept of death's design to emerge through characters' experiences and discussions rather than direct confrontation. This absence creates an eerie, omnipresent force that feels both inevitable and inescapable, heightening suspense and existential dread. Final Destination's script also employs concise scene descriptions and tight narrative structure that keep the story focused and streamlined. This economy allows the film to maintain momentum, ensuring that each scene advances the plot or develops characters meaningfully. The balance of dialogue, action, and visual storytelling demonstrates strong screenwriting discipline. The screenplay structure supports a clear narrative arc, beginning with the premonition, moving through escalating deaths and survival attempts and culminating in a tense climax. Dialogue plays a key role in marking these transitions, with conversations signaling changes in character attitudes and plot developments. Final Destination's marketing and promotional campaign played a significant role in the film's commercial success and the establishment of its lasting presence within the horror genre. Given the film's relatively modest budget and original concept, the marketing strategy was carefully designed to generate curiosity, build suspense, and leverage the film's unique premise of fate and death to capture audience attention. The campaign combined traditional advertising with innovative and targeted approaches to reach horror fans and general moviegoers alike. One of the most notable aspects of the marketing for Final Destination was the use of the film's tagline and concept as a hook. Phrases like, "Death has a design," and "There's no escaping fate," were central to posters, trailers, and promotional materials. This clever framing emphasized the film's unique angle on horror, focusing on the inevitability of death and a chain of deadly accidents, rather than typical slasher tropes. The tagline became iconic and helped differentiate Final Destination in a crowded marketplace. The theatrical trailers were crafted to intrigue without revealing too much. They showcased key moments of tension, the premonition of the plane crash, and several suspenseful death scenes, but avoided spoiling the climax or the exact sequence of events. The editing pace of the trailers was quick and suspenseful, featuring jump cuts, intense music, and glimpses of the main characters reacting to impending doom. This approach effectively built anticipation and suspense, enticing viewers to experience the full story in theaters. Posters and print advertisements were another cornerstone of the film's promotion. The most recognizable poster featured the image of a cracked airplane window with a haunting sky visible beyond, immediately connecting to the opening disaster and suggesting the theme of fractured fate. Other posters highlighted the cast or depicted eerie, empty spaces that invoked a sense of dread. The design choices favored minimalist but striking visuals that stood out in cinemas, magazines, and billboards, reinforcing brand recognition. Final Destination's marketing also leveraged the emerging power of the internet in the late 1990s and early 2000s. The official website offered visitors exclusive content such as character bios, behind-the-scenes photos, and interactive elements related to the film's premise. This online presence was innovative at the time for a horror movie, creating a platform for fans to engage with the film beyond traditional advertising. It also allowed for the distribution of teaser trailers and updates that kept interest alive between theatrical release and home video availability. Media interviews and press tours were strategically planned to highlight the film's originality and the cast's enthusiasm. Lead actors like Devon and Ollie Larder appeared on talk shows, horror conventions, and film festivals, discussing their experiences and the film's unique concept. These appearances helped humanize the film, making it more relatable and building a connection between the audience and the performers. Cast involvement in promotional events contributed to word-of-mouth buzz, particularly among horror fans. Cross-promotions and tie-ins with other brands were limited but effective. Select partnerships with retailers and media outlets included promotional giveaways, themed contests, and branded merchandise like t-shirts and posters. While the merchandising was not extensive, it complemented the overall marketing effort and allowed fans to express their enthusiasm for the film. Social media as it exists today was not a major factor in the original marketing due to the film's release timing. However, the film's cult following and fan engagement later flourished on online forums, fan sites, and social networks, extending the life of the promotion well beyond the initial theatrical run. This organic, fan-driven promotion became an essential part of Final Destination's enduring popularity. Television advertising targeted key demographics, especially young adults who were the primary audience for the film. Commercials were aired during programming popular with teenagers and young adults, such as late-night shows, music videos, and genre-specific programming on cable networks. The ads were crafted to intrigue rather than shock, appealing to viewers' curiosity about the film's premise. The marketing team also capitalized on the popularity of disaster films and supernatural thrillers at the time. By positioning Final Destination as a fresh and innovative take on these genres, promotional efforts emphasized its originality and suspense. Trailers and ads often drew comparisons or subtle references to earlier successful films, helping situate Final Destination within a recognizable genre while highlighting its unique selling points. Festival screenings and early previews served as a promotional tool by generating early buzz and critical attention. Select horror film festivals showcased Final Destination, creating opportunities for press coverage and fan excitement. These early showings helped build momentum leading up to the wide release. The timing of the release was another important promotional consideration. Launching the film in the summer positioned it as a thrilling counterpoint to blockbuster fare, targeting audiences seeking suspense and scares. This strategic timing helped Final Destination find its niche and attract viewers looking for a different cinematic experience. Video rental stores and home video releases also played a significant role in promoting the film post-theatrical run. Eye-catching cover art and packaging emphasized the film's key themes and memorable sequences, enticing consumers to rent or purchase the movie. This extended the film's reach and revenue potential while reinforcing its brand. In summary, Final Destination's marketing and promotion combined clear messaging, strategic use of visual and verbal hooks, cast engagement, and emerging internet technology to effectively reach its target audience. The campaign's emphasis on the film's unique premise and suspenseful tone helped it stand out and build a lasting fan base. These efforts contributed significantly to the film's commercial success and enduring place in horror cinema. Final Destination stands out within the horror genre for its distinctive premise, narrative structure, and tone, but it also shares connections and contrasts with a variety of similar films and directors' works. A comparative analysis helps situate Final Destination in the broader cinematic landscape, revealing its innovations as well as influences and how it differentiates itself through storytelling, style, and thematic focus. One of the most immediate points of comparison is with disaster films and supernatural thrillers that preceded it. Unlike traditional disaster movies where survival depends on physical endurance or heroic action, Final Destination introduces a supernatural element that renders human intervention largely futile. This focus on fate and inevitability distinguishes it from films like Twister or Armageddon, where characters actively fight against destruction. Final Destination flips this trope by emphasizing that death's design cannot be outsmarted, creating a tension between agency and destiny that is less common in disaster cinema. In terms of narrative structure, Final Destination's approach to death as an invisible, relentless antagonist invites comparison with classic slasher films, but with a unique twist. Rather than a singular killer, death itself operates as the villain, systematically targeting characters in a chain reaction of accidents. This concept shares thematic ground with the Scream series, which plays with slasher conventions, but Final Destination is more rigid and fate-driven. Where Scream uses meta-humor and self-awareness, Final Destination maintains a serious, suspenseful tone focused on the inevitability of death rather than escaping it. Comparing Final Destination to earlier supernatural horror films reveals its innovative approach to suspense and death sequences. Films like The Omen or The Ring center on malevolent forces with personified evil entities. In contrast, Final Destination's antagonist is abstract and unseen, creating a pervasive atmosphere of dread without direct confrontation. This makes the horror more psychological and conceptual, a notable shift from visual or monstrous threats common in the genre. The film also aligns with and diverges from director James Wong's other works. As a writer and director known for blending horror with intricate plotting and strong character focus, Wong's style is evident in Final Destination's blend of suspense and emotional depth. His previous work on The X-Files television series showcases his ability to balance supernatural elements with grounded storytelling, a skill that transfers to the film. However, Final Destination is more streamlined and faster-paced, emphasizing action and tension over mystery and investigation typical in Wong's TV work. Final Destination's influence is clear when compared to subsequent horror franchises. It effectively launched a new subgenre focused on creative, elaborate death scenes, inspiring series like Happy Death Day and The Ring remakes that similarly blend supernatural premises with suspenseful, character-driven narratives. Its success paved the way for more films that explore fate, destiny, and chain reactions, contributing to the evolution of modern horror. In terms of tone, Final Destination strikes a balance between teen horror and psychological thriller. Comparing it to earlier teen horror classics like Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer highlights differences in focus. While those films incorporate mystery and interpersonal conflict alongside slasher elements, Final Destination zeroes in on existential dread and inevitability, elevating the stakes beyond typical teen drama to more philosophical territory. The film's visual style also sets it apart. While many horror films rely on dark, shadowy environments to create fear, Final Destination uses bright, everyday settings such as airports and schools. This choice echoes the horror approach in films like The Innocents or The Haunting, where normal spaces become sites of terror. However, Final Destination's use of ordinary, modern locations to stage extraordinary death sequences adds a fresh, relatable dimension that differs from more gothic or stylized horror films. Final Destination's screenplay differs significantly from typical horror scripts by focusing on a tightly woven plot driven by fate's design. Unlike films where characters investigate or fight an antagonist, this script relies on building tension through anticipation and inevitability. This approach contrasts with more dialogue-heavy horror films like The Exorcist or The Shining, where character psychology and dialogue dominate. Final Destination's script uses dialogue sparingly and effectively to propel the plot and develop key relationships. Compared to remakes or reboots of horror classics, Final Destination was an original concept rather than a remake, which was relatively uncommon at the time of its release. Many horror films in the late 1990s and early 2000s relied on remakes to attract audiences, but Final Destination's fresh premise helped it stand out. This originality contributed to its lasting appeal and spawned multiple sequels that expanded on its unique mythology. The film's success also invites comparison with other horror franchises that emphasize inventive death scenes and suspense, such as the Saw and Final Destination sequels themselves. While Saw leans more into graphic violence and moral puzzles, Final Destination maintains a cleaner, less gruesome approach, focusing on suspense and chain reaction accidents. This difference in style broadens the range of horror experiences available to audiences and highlights Final Destination's niche. Finally, Final Destination's cultural and genre impact can be seen in how it influenced filmmakers who explore fate, death, and inevitability in creative ways. Directors like David Robert Mitchell and Mike Flanagan have cited inspiration from films that blend horror with thoughtful narrative structures. Final Destination's legacy as a film that combines scares with existential questions makes it a touchstone for modern horror storytelling. In summary, Final Destination occupies a unique place in horror cinema through its innovative premise, narrative structure, and tone. When compared to disaster films, supernatural thrillers, slasher movies, and other genre works, it reveals both its inspirations and its distinct contributions. Its balance of suspense, originality, and character-driven storytelling distinguishes it from contemporaries and predecessors, while its influence on later films cements its legacy as a pioneering and enduring horror classic.